Did you see what the 9/11 operator may have done during the Buffalo supermarket shooting? If not, you better watch this. Hello folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, constitutional attorney, best-selling author, and proud American gun owner. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel, please show your support for our fellow gun owner and the Second Amendment by hitting that subscribe button right now. Today I want to talk about a group of people that we gun owners ought to know a little bit more about, but we really don't even think about, and that is 911 operators, emergency operators. Now, I've written about this potential problem with 911 operators in prior books, discussions I've had about this, because as you know, it's my view, and probably your view too, that the police, the firemen, and the EMTs are really not first responders. That is a misnomer. That is a false statement. In reality, you and I, the ordinary American citizen, we are the first responders because it is we who come across the sick person, who deal with the criminal, who deal with the fire first. And we, as the first responders, then pick up the phone and perhaps call 911 or otherwise deal with the problem. And then the police, the firemen, or the ambulance shows up as the second or perhaps the third responders to the situation. Now, what I want to talk about today are the tools by which we communicate to the police, the firemen, and the ambulance operators. That is the 911 operators. And you're like, Mark, why do I care about 911 operators? How did this even come up? It's because I want you to understand that if the 911 operators don't do their job, if they fail to do their job, nothing else works. And I want to talk about something here because this happens on many occasions. It's not talked about, but I want to bring 3 instances of this to your attention. So when you talk about the importance of 911 operators, you can do so with these examples. First of all, in the Buffalo shooting in Buffalo, New York at the Tops grocery store, we now know that there was at least one person in the store who was trying to avoid the active shooter there, who apparently called 911 during the shooting and was whispering into the phone that there was an active shooter, that she was whispering because she was trying not to draw attention to herself, but someone needed to call the cops. And apparently, or allegedly, what happened was the 911 operator in Buffalo started yelling at this active shooter victim and was asking, "Why are you whispering? You don't have to whisper." But it turns out that, of course, the woman who was avoiding the active shooter was saying, he's in the store, he's shooting, he's an active shooter, and I'm scared for my life. And it turns out that this 911 operator, at least according to allegations and news reports, hung up on this woman who was in the store. And the woman eventually had to call her boyfriend, asking the boyfriend to call 911 to report the active shooter situation in Tops. Apparently this 911 operator is under investigation and they're trying to figure out whether or not she did something wrong. And if the allegations are true, it certainly sounds like she did something terribly wrong by hanging up on the woman who was in the store, potentially being shot at by an active shooter. Now, this is not the first time that a 911 operator has gone awry. I want to talk about actually a story that rarely gets discussed, and that is the Steve Scalise shooting. Now, you all remember back after Donald Trump was elected president, Steve Scalise and other members in Congress were preparing for a congressional baseball game, and it was the Republican team practicing for the congressional baseball game, which is an annual affair. And during this practice, a gunman opened fire and shot at the practice, including hitting Steve Scalise, a congressman, of course, we all are familiar with. Now, we know that part of the story, but did you know the other part of the story? That is, instead of responding directly to the Virginia baseball field where Steve Scalise and the others were shot, the members of the Capitol Police Containment and Emergency Response Team actually were sent somehow originally to House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi's house in Georgetown, miles away from the baseball field. Now, this is a very sensitive story, and they were investigating how this happened. They eventually did show up at the baseball field, but originally it sounds like what happened was someone somehow were sent to the wrong place. Again, not blaming the police here, but obviously somehow, some way, somebody miscommunicated or didn't understand what was said and went to the wrong place. Again, another example of the dispatchers or 911 operators maybe not being clear or maybe not doing the job as perfectly as they should. The third example of this, and there's many examples of this, but I'm just going to talk about a couple here, and that is there are actually multiple instances in American history of 911 phone operators actually getting arrested or being sentenced and convicted of crimes for hanging up on 911 calls. In 2018, for example, there was one operator in Texas that actually had to go to jail because she kept hanging up on thousands of 911 calls. And then in 2021, down in the state of Louisiana, there was a 911 operator in New Orleans who was basically, there was an arrest warrant issued for her. It's unclear what happened in the case, but an arrest warrant was issued because they looked at her records and it turned out that she had disconnected several phone calls while she was working as a 911 emergency line operator in New Orleans. And she was hanging up on these people. So the bottom line is this. Next time people tell you, you don't need a gun and you're not your own first responder, don't forget, you don't even talk about the police for a second. Don't forget that this all assumes the fantasy world that the anti-gunners live in, which is the government will be there to protect you, presupposes a competent, successful, effective 911 emergency system actually being able to communicate what's going on at the scene of the crime or the emergency to the so-called first responders who are really second or third responders and getting there in the right time. But as I just gave you 3 instances right here, right now, that does not always happen, which is why you and I need to be our own first responders. We need to be prepared for all contingencies, and sometimes those contingencies may require the use of a private firearm in self-defense, which is exactly what the Supreme Court contemplated in the Heller versus the District of Columbia case. Okay, I hope you learned something here today at the Four Boxes Diner, and again, we'll see you next time here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.